Cool. So, how are people doing? Can people type something in chat so that I know you exist?
Yeah, raise your
Because
hand.
yeah, I don't know how many people made it this far, and I want to give
Eight,
props to anyone who did.
8 hours in. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we got two.
Nice.
Still
170.
178 people live. Amazing.
Nice.
Cool.
All right. There's a slight delay, I can tell. There's like a 20-second stream delay or something here.
Hmm.
Awesome.
Okay, yeah, good.
Brain has exploded. I feel you, bro. Yeah. All right. So the idea with this session, we did this at the last Sub0, and it was pretty fun. People seem to like it, so we're going to do it again. And that time it was me, Rob, and Björn who just sat down and chit-chatted about random ideas. So the idea here is that we talk about your ideas. We've pre-populated the Ask a Question box with some of our own ideas, but we don't want to sit here and circle jerk all day. So, we want to talk about other exciting things. And please post your ideas or topics or thoughts, something that you want us to talk about. And we'll see what we can make of it. While we wait on that, I think we kick off with one of our own ones. And currently, highest voted one with one vote is your idea, Shawn, on email text message subscription. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, actually, 2 votes now on the languages, but let's talk about email and text message subscriptions. So, I think in general, there are a lot of things that happen on the blockchain, and we have this event system where if you're a runtime developer, you can emit an event when something happens, but only if you're, have the Polkadot.js open, or if you have, some magical knowing of what's happening on the blockchain, will you actually get notified of that event. It'd be really cool to have some service. It would be a third-party service. It wouldn't be necessarily decentralized, but would just notify you, hey, something has happened on the blockchain. This idea initially came up when I was working on the recovery palette, so like being able to recover your account. And one of the protections of the recovery palette is that there's a delay in how long it takes for someone to recover an account, so that if someone maliciously tried to take your account, they couldn't do it. So the idea here is like, if someone's recovering your account, maybe you should get a text message saying, hey, someone's trying to take your account. Is it actually you? Just like if you were to sign into like Google or any other single sign-on application, it would tell you, hey, is this actually you logging in? And so take that, but talk about balance transfers, when things are happening, big governance proposals, like all these kinds of things. Let's get notified in a simple, easy to use way about things that are happening on the blockchain. And this is something that totally, it would kill. It would totally kill. I would use it all the time.
Yeah. In a centralized way, it would be easy, right? Just set up a node, monitor everything, take signups, take subscriptions for whoever wants a notification about anything. I guess the challenge is, can you make it decentralized? Can you have a decentralized set of notifiers that subscribes to, who wants to be notified of what, and have that spam proof?
Yeah. Well, my perspective real quick is that it's less important for it to be noisy, but more important that you don't miss a message, right? Like if it's noisy, okay, you could probably figure that out by like unsubscribing or changing some settings, whatever. But the whole thing is you don't want to miss a message. So if we could create some small incentive scheme, like if you notify me about something that I think is important and you get paid for that service, that would, I think, kind of help solve some of those problems. But I don't know exactly how it would work.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting for, like, take Polkadot governance, for example, where there's no intrinsic value for you to participate. So really what you want to have is, I want to have a push notification. You have to say yes or no to this. That's really how easy it should be. And obviously we're not there. But I think for stuff like that, it could be really interesting.
Yeah. Also, I'd say, there are even like Polkadot has the Web3 Foundation, who's kind of like the spearhead of some of the things. So it would make sense that, if we got such a framework set up, that something like Web3 Foundation would be willing to take the costs on and, be the good entity to be like, hey, there's a new proposal, like, please vote. Like just enabling that kind of end-to-end workflow would just be a really great start, but it doesn't exist today that I know of.
There was a comment, it's sort of like in a notification Oracle network. Yeah, kind of It's an interesting thought if it needs to be a network of its own, or like if it needs to have incentives. Ben said they did implement email notifications, and in their hackathon project, gather dot what the fuck or WTF, and I do remember this. And off-chain workers is actually a good way of doing that, right? You have this thing that runs, and it runs off-chain. It can do whatever it wants. It can send an email. I guess the thing is, you have to see like who is doing this and why would they do it. You could argue that the validators would do it just because like they wouldn't turn off their off-chain workers because they use them for other stuff anyway, and it's sort of to the health of the network that that they keep doing that. But when it comes to something like an email server and having that on the same machine as your validator is pretty trivial. But when it comes to something like push notifications for phones, it's actually a slightly more complicated thing to run. But then you could probably just go through the phone provider. So you go through Apple and Google to make the notifications pop up. I'm not sure. It's a good idea though. Having a really good notification framework built into off-chain workers is probably a good idea.
Yeah.
And then the incentives part, I still don't really know how to figure out. But if the building blocks are there, I'm sure someone will figure it out.
Yeah, people are writing try polkalert.com. I don't actually even know that.
That's cool.
For notifications via webhooks. Yeah, that's kind of cool. But that's a centralized thing, right? That's pretty easy to set up.
Sure.
Yeah. But I mean, to be honest, I would be happy to start with something centralized and work from there. Anything that we have.
Yeah. I guess that's the story with a lot of things is sort of what I was talking about in my
So it runs locally.
It's actually the next most upvoted question. A service we have very centralized, but you said decentralized infrastructure provider with incentives.
Then the next it's the most upvoted question.
Yeah, I mean the next after
that one,
the one we just talked about.
Fair.
Yeah.
So I put this in. I think we actually talked about this in the last ideas lab, but I'm not sure. This is a thing that I harp on about 24/7. Any opportunity that's given to me, so I feel like I'm talking about it all the time. But it's this idea of a decentralized infrastructure provider. So what I mean with that is something like Infura, but decentralized. So, someone who serves you data, serves like clients, who gives you responses to RPC requests. The problem with just pure RPC requests is that they're not proven. So if you're making a light client request, you get a Merkle proof back saying this response is correct. You could, in theory, do the same thing with RPC requests. It's just that it doesn't exist there right now, and there would need to be an extra layer in there to make that happen. But the crux of this is obviously that something like Infura is funded by Joe Lubin, and it is running at a massive loss. It actually costs a ton to run a service like this. So how do you do that? That is not losing money, ideally making money, but even is just a break-even sort of effort for the health of the network. And there are many ways that you could do it. Like you could set up state channels where you do micropayments per request. You could do subscription models. I get access to a dedicated endpoint for, this sort of monthly subscription of tokens that I send you, or like I have some on-chain commitment of sending you, whatever it may be. So this is something I would be super interested in seeing. Someone had put in, there is POKT.network for helping them with implementation of substrate chains. I actually haven't seen that. Do you know about that, Fabi?
No, it's the first time I hear about it.
Awesome.
But it's great.
Awesome.
I'll learn stuff here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got to check that out. But that's the ideal, right? Where we don't really need to rely on centralized providers or gateways or whatever to actually be decentralized.
Yeah. I think for me, if I was trying to imagine what I would want from a service like this, I mean, I'm going back to my, exploring Ethereum days. And I remember, the first thing I would try to do is interact with Web3.js to try to build some cool, things that show me the balance of my account or this kind of that. And all I had to do was basically just like pop in some URL, and then bam, it would feed me data, and I could just interact with the RPC. And this was even before I started doing micro, before I had an account or I had any ETH. I just wanted to play with the APIs, right? So I don't know to what extent this can be offered in a decentralized way, because decentralized services always have to have some kind of incentive in there. But to me, the dream world fantasy is some kind of on-ramp that allows the brand new user to get swooped up into the ecosystem by giving them free access to the APIs, and then real power users, they will be actually going in and financially making this profitable or break even for the people who actually use it.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this in general goes to another idea, which is, I think it's been brought up a few times, just kind of like this, some number of free transactions or some number of free requests. Like somehow in this blockchain world, how can we get the new user base to more easily join in? Because there's a huge hurdle, right, around just getting the initial tokens to even make your first transaction. So what kinds of mechanisms can we invent such that we can offer free transactions to low users and have all that covered by power users who end up paying paying more, which would cover the fees or costs of the low users. I did this for a hackathon, but I don't think I really investigated it in a really economically sound way. I just tried to play with Substrate and see what can I do and tweak the runtime to make it work. But I do know that other runtimes or other Substrate developers have implemented some free transaction stuff on their runtimes.
Yeah, I mean the hacky Ethereum smart contract version of that is just you have a contract that holds a bunch of whatever your token is, right? And you use that as an onboard. But I actually think the design space in Substrate is much bigger than that. You can actually be quite innovative.
Something I'm particularly interested in is sort of microloans, and that ties in with the decentralized infrastructure thing, because you could say that I get a loan of 1 DOT from the network, it's minted 1 DOT, and then it's paid back by me running a server that serves requests, and then I pay back my DOT by providing some utility to the network. So the easy thing, the easy version of that is doing it for validators, right? Where you could give some, well, you would have to be extremely careful in how you do this because it's potentially attackable. But the core concept is like you give someone a loan, they are allowed to stake with that loan, but they're not allowed to ever take the staking amount out. They're only allowed to take the profits from the staking out. So at the end of when they've made, if the loan is 1 DOT, when they've made 1 DOT in profits, they pay back the 1 DOT and they have 1 DOT because they've been a validator for long enough to sort of make that back.
Yeah.
So I think those kinds of things are pretty cool.
I don't know how the micro loans you were thinking of are, but I mean, I definitely one of the ideas that I would love to see or have people think about is ways for people in the proof of stake world to still have a non-fiat based on-ramp. I'm not sure the way I'm supposed to say it, but in the proof of work world, you can run a computer. No matter how slow it is, eventually you'll make some micro tokens. You can join a pool, whatever, and have an on-ramp, which doesn't require you to put your bank account into some exchange and get some tokens, right? And so in this proof of stake world, it's much harder to do that. Like there's no way for you, unless you already have tokens, to make more tokens, right? So could we invent mechanisms like some unsigned transactions where you can suggest improvements to the storage layout of Substrate or whatever, right? And this storage layout improvements will add some efficiency, and you get paid for that suggestion. Or we have this offline fragment, which we talked about earlier today. And we're looking for optimizations in the distribution of voters and people who get voted for. And if you as someone can make an offer of hey, this is a better solution, maybe we can pay you for that and let you get that initial on ramp into the space.
Yeah. There was comments if your DApp pays transaction fees for onboarding users, how do you prevent Sybil attack? That's actually one of the attack vectors that I said you have to be careful about, it is certainly a problem, and you need to solve it somehow. But there are multiple ways of solving it. So having an identity network or reputation-based system or whatever it may be, that you could actually work around this thing. But not non-trivial.
Yeah. Is it okay if I delete some of the questions we've answered just to clean up the question
If
list?
you can.
I think you can mark them as answered.
I can't.
I
think
can,
a
I can
mod
delete my own
of some
questions.
sort has to, and I don't have mod.
Yeah, same here.
Okay, well, whatever. Okay, we just
Yeah, let's leave them there. Let's maybe a mod comes in at some point and moves them to answered. I'm looking for a question from the audience. Highest uploaded one that isn't from us three is when multi-factor 2FA using Substrate multisig palettes. So basically the question is Substrate multisig palette, when do we get 2FA in it?
yeah.
Assuming, I mean multisig is already 2FA or more than 2FA, but I assume they mean like phone integrations.
Well, I think I've talked to Joshua about this before, and this kind of relates to the phone notification system. And I think we had brainstormed an idea that you could create a multi-sig where you own both accounts, but one account, the key is on your phone, and one account, the key is on your computer. And basically, when you submit a transaction on your computer, you can then open your phone, open a light client. The light client can listen for, hey, has my computer sent the transaction? If so, pull it and basically press a button to be the second factor to that off.
Right. So it's not anything fundamentally different. It's still the same multisig. It's just that it has the same UX as Web 2.0 2FA, where I do something on my computer and then it tells me open up your phone and click OK, and I can just do that and it works.
Yeah, and with a light client, it's pretty doable. Like you can
for sure
see if there's especially since
even without it, even with something like Steiner, you don't need chain awareness, right? You just need to know that a transaction exists on the network and it's signed by you.
Exactly.
So in some sense, it could just like your computer could send your phone in a peer-to-peer way. Here's a transaction, sign it. But assuming that
it needs to be that. Again, once you press the button on your computer, you're the one who goes on your phone and can just open the 2FA app, and then it will query the blockchain. Hey, is there a transaction waiting for me to sign the other two?
What I mean is, like, you don't even have to go to the blockchain. You can get that transaction from somewhere else.
Sure, yeah.
So like it could be even simpler than that.
Yeah. But it
wouldn't
would
be hard.
It would also be a really traditional what people are used to experience.
Yeah,
for sure.
A pretty nice UX actually. Someone should build that.
I feel like we should compile a little Web3 grants list out of these things.
Yeah. But we should also get a cut of the grant, right? Is that
yes.
Is that how that works?
That's how it works.
Our idea lab.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? Joshy's idea has a lot of upvotes. Object capability palette for frame. Actually, I don't know what this means.
So I'm very fascinated but unconvinced by object capabilities. So it's a paradigm, mindset, a way of writing software where you define not like users and their permissions, but pieces of code and their capabilities. So instead of saying that I, as a user, am allowed to execute these things, you're saying like this piece of code is allowed to, read this state from something else, right? You have permissions on an object's basis rather than a user basis. So there's the agoric people who've been working on this for a long time. Like their entire thing is object capabilities based smart contracts, and they have this object capabilities framework in JavaScript that they want to use for writing smart contracts in. And it's super cool. I think it really fits certain styles of programming, certain types of programs really well. But it all also like changes your entire way of thinking, the way you have to write software. And so I don't know. It's very hard for me to wrap my head around like how to actually write software this way in a good way.
Well, does Rust support this type of approach, would you say?
Not really. So the thing is, you could make it support that type of
Yeah, actually,
paradigm.
I want to ask Joshi. So you say this is a capabilities palette. So is this some kind of, so you need to, do you, in your mind, is this a palette that we create that you then use this palette to then build a bunch of other services on top of it? Or is this more like we should design our palettes in this manner? I can delegate some of my capabilities by creating a new object called a forwarder.
Yeah. Gets like once you, yeah. So like,
I'm not sure.
I think he's talking about making,
Could be,
yeah, could be it. It gets really complicated once you really dig into like, delegating capabilities. It's also like exposing capabilities, so objects can say to the world, you can come to me to do this, and then you can sort of discover capabilities in weird ways. I'm not an expert on this by any means, but I don't know. I've talked to the Agori people quite a bit, and they built this framework for it in JavaScript, and it uses a subset of JavaScript that they call Tcr JavaScript. And I imagine you could do the same thing in Rust, actually more easily than you could do it in JavaScript. So it should be entirely doable to actually introduce this in Rust and certainly in Frame. But it's sort of hard. And to the point of my earlier talk on opinions, like this would be the biggest opinion that would be so opinionated to go, we're doing everything object capabilities fashion.
I mean, kind of in this light, I would be really excited for the day when the first non-Rust, non-Frame runtime is created, that I could load in a Substrate, executable, and then launch a network, or whatever. And that's going to really, push the limits kind of things we've taken for granted, and maybe even force us to rethink about APIs and our customer facing user APIs for interacting with the runtime.
That's a good thing to your question. More language supports. Which ones?
Yeah. Programming languages.
Yeah.
But also regular languages. Of course, we're always looking for people to champion Substrate in their native language, but definitely programming languages, I think, to start.
Yeah.
But you're talking about like runtime development specifically?
Well, I'm just thinking, again, this is, anything beyond runtime development, I'm not sure you'll be using Substrate anymore if you're using different languages and stuff like that. But again, the sandbox that we provide in Substrate allows you to write your runtime in a different language.
Yeah.
It's something that's taken way longer than I thought it would. Like, to be honest, like when we started writing Substrate and when we started writing Frame, and we had like, this is how you write a runtime in Rust. Like we kind of went out and said that almost 2 years ago, year and a half ago. And I kind of expected someone to turn around within a couple of months and say, okay, this is how you write a runtime in C, at least, because it's easy, right? C is super easy to compile to WASM. The interface is super easy. Just do that, super easy. No one really did. And then like my next bet was someone is going to do it in assembly scripts because it's like it resembles JavaScript. It has a popular user base and like all these other things. But then we actually dug into this a bit ourselves, and I or like Steffi Parity did specifically, and she did a great job kind of convincing me why no one has done it in assembly script yet. It's not as much of a subset of JavaScript as I thought it was, and it actually requires rewriting a ton of stuff, like basic crypto libraries, the scale codec. Like you have to go back from scratch and like rewrite a bunch of shit to have a runtime in assembly script. And someone commented like it's used by Near already. It is, but for a much more limited set of things. So I think if you're targeting smart contracts with assembly script, for instance, it's much easier to write everything from scratch because you get everything complicated out of the box, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's also one of these things, I think, if it's either done internally or it's done if you have strong incentives around it, but it's not going to be something that someone just decides to do. It speaks also a little bit to, Frame is actually pretty usable. No one has had the feeling yet to reinvent it.
Yeah, I guess there has to be a point of friction. I mean, either it's someone who's just interested enough and wants to learn and practice, and because like it doesn't require an army to write a runtime or a runtime framework, at least a simple one.
Yeah.
But I think there's a thing to say there about like there has to come a point of friction where it's just so hard to do what you want that you go back and write another runtime framework from scratch. Like the trade-off there, it's like, do I learn Rust or do I start from scratch with the whole thing? And learning Rust is probably easier.
Yeah. When it comes to new languages, though, it's not just about the runtime. I think I think one thing I really want to champion is, right now, Substrate is viewed as basically like the blockchain runtime framework. But again, one of the things you'll start to see, especially as we launch Polkadot, especially as we launch other networks using Substrate or other chains that are going live, is that it's really an ecosystem. Like, building the runtime is like step one, right? And then it's all about building the user interfaces, the middle layers, all that kind of stuff. And so when we talk about like, not having scale codec available in all these different languages, or all the cryptography, like, ED25019 or SR25019 available in different languages, this is going to be a huge problem for people who want to build things that interact with the Substrate chain. So like one thing I would call out for any Python developer out there is like, I think that signing is still not implemented. I think the Polkascan folks have done a really awesome job implementing all of Scale Codec and all of these, what they need to build the Block Explorer APIs, but they don't do transaction signing. And so right now there's just no signing in Python. And this would be a big step forward for accessibility to users who want to program in Python and interact with Substrate. And then, of course, take this and do it for all the most common languages. I think we really only have JavaScript and Yako basically carrying that entire thing on his back as the way to interact with Substrate. But we really should push for more languages here.
Yeah. And there are Web3 grants for this.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of teams working on different language support. I mean, but it's one of these things, like either you have that problem or you're not going to do it, right? Yeah. Or someone pays you for it, but it's not, no one goes out and is just going to implement, all kinds of different APIs in different languages just because they feel like it.
Yeah. It's another idea. ABI package manager /registry. Using Inc contracts, I lost it. Using Inc contracts and IPFS to deliver packages and WASM like NPM, but for Substrate. So I'm not exactly sure if this person is talking about pallets or contracts, because I don't know how Inc enters the picture if we're talking about pallets. But I can talk about pallets because it's something we've actually thought about. We do want a package manager for pallets for Frame. And the nice thing is it's all Rust, and we can actually use Cargo, and we can use the existing Rust tooling to be our package manager. So that's actually pretty amazing. Of course, it's all centralized. If it's not centralized in Cargo's own official repo of stuff, then it would be centralized in whatever we host. Making an IPFS-backed version of that is, non-trivial because of the way Cargo is designed and like how it handles things. But it's not impossible. I mean, it's sort of traditional web development stuff. I think almost anyone could do that. But I think a tougher problem than just package management is package discoverability. So, the Ruby community has several websites for this. NPM also works as sort of a discovery tool, but it's not great. Having a really great way to discover palettes, I think is key to actually building the ecosystem of these packages.
So the response was, it's actually more about binaries or packages which can be delivered in any language, but you have a deterministic source for the palette XY or contract framework Z.
I think there is probably a confusion here of like what the fundamental unit of shipping is. Like we don't, in Frame, it's not that every palette is individually compiled to WASM and then delivered on chain. It's all compiled together as one runtime, and then that one runtime is a binary that gets deployed on chain.
Yeah.
So it's not really possible to split each pallet's like final binary because it has to like compile together with the other stuff.
Yeah.
That's how Frame is designed, but it's actually not to say that that's the only way to do it. You could do it that way, that each module, each unit is its own WASM binary, and they just live together on the chain. But it's a longer story. It's not how Frame works.
As a general improvement to the runtime, that would be something cool to see. I don't know what kind of overheads it would impose, but having each module be its own WASM blob would mean a bunch of different things. One, upgrades would not be the entire runtime. Like you could have certain palettes which could be permanent and unchanging, like something like the balances palette is unchanging, and then palettes around it can be moving. So you would have this kind of mix between the security of a Bitcoin-like world and the composability of what we want Polkadot to be. Additionally, it also means that upgrades like the WASM blobs are much smaller, right? Like you don't have to every single upgrade put like 300 kilobytes onto the blockchain. You just have these small packets that you can just iterate on. But I think there is going to be a lot of overhead at those WASM interfaces.
Yeah, and the more complicated thing is like figuring out dependencies and how like you can break things in so many more ways once you go down this path. And generally, our philosophy is like make things hard to break.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, IPFS as a delivery network sounds good, but in reality, it's not. I mean, I agree, it's not for many reasons.
Yeah.
It's also people have this misconception that put it on IPFS and it's decentralized. Absolutely not in any way. The way IPFS works is I upload something to my server, and then other people can choose to rehost it. There's no automatic rehosting. There's no availability guarantees. There's nothing. It's basically still centralized. But that's why Protocol Labs is working on Filecoin. But it's still better than like put it in an S3 bucket and whatever.
Yeah. Speaking real quick of IPFS, I mean, I think it's almost a year now that Ben from Parity worked on a project which did some rough integration with IPFS. Basically made it that, IPFS uses the P2P, Substrate uses the P2P. Could we put into a Substrate node an IPFS node? And I believe he got a big chunk of it working, but I think it's one of those things where he put some code out there. And I think I would have hoped that someone would have been like, yeah, let's finish this. Let's take champion it. Like the hard part was already done or something. But it hasn't happened yet. So if you're really interested in these two technologies, I mean, they literally can be fused at the hip.
Yeah. Storage in general is huge thing that is really core, really key to actually having decentralized applications and infrastructure. So it's something we think about a lot, but it's still a little bit like, wait and see if someone from the community steps up and does it before we do.
Yeah, if someone wants to go deep, it's a good project to pick up for sure.
Yeah, just a few weekends.
Yeah, exactly.
Ethereum Swarm is decentralized. Yeah, sort of, but it kind of also doesn't exist. Half exists.
Is TCR still relevant in 2020?
I think so, but just not as hyped as like in whatever 2017, 18.
Yeah, I think it definitely got, there's definitely a Gartner cycle going on with TCRs, and we're probably through the hype now. I still haven't seen a TCR that really solved the problem in the real world. I think it always looks good on paper, and the whole token engineering movement that came afterwards was nice, but I don't know how much came out of it that we can point to today and say like, oh, we actually had a problem here where we tried to permission something and we are now doing it in this economic way and it's solved through a TCR, for example.
I don't know. Yeah, I haven't seen a great example either. But there are some like less serious examples that were fun, and like talking about civil resistance and how can we build systems that you can have loans or whatever. You could like do something fun like this. Like I remember seeing some example of like build a playlist in a decentralized way with a TCR, like a music playlist, and it doesn't matter if someone snuck in another song in there, but it was spam resistant. It wasn't all Rick Astley, so it's interesting.
Yeah, so Gotham from Parity actually built like an example TCR on Substrate. That's a while ago. I'm not quite sure where this is now, if he actually maintained it, but should be floating out there somewhere.
So I don't know if we have more questions. What are your thoughts on Bancor formula bonded curves? I don't honestly know that much about it. Do you have thoughts on this?
No, I don't.
I remember seeing the talk. I think it was last Sub0.
Yeah. If you wanted to elaborate,
it's not really.
Alex.
Yeah, I'm not that deep into it. I've worked in fintech, but it's not my area.
Yeah, Fabi, your post is more innovative parachain economic crypto models. I definitely have written down more interesting governance, more interesting crowdfunding, more interesting just approaches. I think one thing I want to see more of is the community taking a firm foot down, being like, I want to try it a different way. Like as much as I love people, using our palettes as a groundwork to just get what they want done, I don't like that people just take for granted, like, okay, I'm going to use the Substrate balances palette. Like, I think that a lot of the palettes we design are very much designed for like the one purpose which we have in mind, which is like the Polkadot. And it is not going to be great for most chains. And I think that I'm waiting for someone to, starting at system, like design a whole new set of palettes. Like, this is actually something, if I ever find like a month free, I would love to work on like the simple Substrate system, which is just a really bare bones version of all the core palettes, but written in a way that's not economically secure necessarily, but is simple to understand. It's like the building blocks for anyone to build something.
That you can just pick up and go from.
Exactly. Yeah. And that would include staking, balances, a little bit of governance, like just like basic coin voting, like these kinds of things, just put in there without really thought of like, can you game the coin voting? Sure. But it's there so you can see how it could be done.
Yeah, it's actually something I find myself saying a lot is when teams come up, like, well, we used, this palette, or why did this decision be made like this in this palette? And the answer is often because Polkadot, right? It's not necessarily because this is the best or most generic way for what you're trying to do, right? It's just like we, like the very first thing that this framework was built with in mind was, okay, let's get it going for Polkadot. And you can piggyback on a lot of these things, but it doesn't mean it's the best way. So, for example, what Akala team has done, I think they've built, like when we still called it SRML, they built the ORML or something like that, where they really like built a whole set of libraries essentially. Rebuild a lot of those things that are just more suited for their project. I think stuff like that is, is of course sometimes more work, but it's often just the better approach.
Yeah. I think Laminar has been pushing the. I think I call it Laminar the same people, right?
Yeah, so essentially, there's Laminar is one of the project partners in the Akala project.
Got it. But yeah, what they have, from what I've seen, been pushing the hardest on kind of doing things in their own way, which is great. But even them, I think I don't think they've ever said it explicitly, but I can kind of feel from them like they might be making some design compromises because they want things to be compatible at some level with existing Substrate. And I'm waiting for the team that really just says like, fuck it, I'm going to build it from the ground up.
Yeah, that's what I said earlier, right? It's weird to me that this hasn't happened yet. Like at some point, like, I mean, if like going back again to my talk, and like someone said in chat afterwards, like if Substrate is like a web server, then does that mean Frame is like Rails or whatever? And I said, yeah, this is basically right. So why hasn't there exists many competitors to Rails? You know, day one of Rails existence, someone said, no, I don't agree with this opinion. I'm going to do it this other way. But that hasn't really happened. I don't know. We're still obviously extremely early here. Super young project. It's like, whatever. Like it's not like Rails was back in 2008, but still, I expect this to happen at some point.
Yeah, I think it shows the power of defaults also, and just if there are already a lot of moving parts, like do you want to make another part moving that, where there might be a somewhat stable target. But in the context of like Parity, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like for many people, it still is the best choice to just go with what's there and pull from the basics and then write a couple of new paths themselves, right? But once you start getting into doing complicated stuff, it starts being like a real trade-off.
Yeah.
How far back do you go? Do you rewrite all the palettes or all of Frame or like whatever? Many considerations.
Yeah, one thing with the parachain economics and like being innovative around this is also, because actually Akala is a good example there, where they've they wrote a whole blog post. Maybe I can actually share it here in the chat in a second, around what they're thinking on like how they want to implement this. And I think it's really worth reading for anyone who's building a parachain currently, because they're really thinking about what does it mean to have a blockchain that doesn't have to pay for security, and that doesn't really exist currently out there, and with Polkadot it suddenly will exist. What does it mean for my parachain economics? But then also there's another thing that before didn't exist, which is like, okay, I have to like somehow get a dot allocation going to secure a slot and potentially do that from time to time. Like, how can I integrate these two things, and how can I actually bake into my native chain token economics a way to like bring all of these things together, plus long-term funding of the project, kind of like what the Polkadot treasury is, and really a comprehensive view on what they think if parachain support is there and XCMP is there, and then all of these things, how a sensible model for parachain economics could look like. And I'd love to see more stuff like that.
Yeah. A couple of comments. How do you guys see the ETH2 testnet launch? It's not really a testnet. I mean, they still haven't figured out most of the stuff that they have to figure out. But I still congratulate them. They've come a long way. It seems that they built it in Rust. Well, some teams did. I think there's, us and one and like the Sigma Prime Lighthouse folks built in Rust. But I mean, there's like 13 teams building ETH2 client, so there's every language. But I think it's cool, and ETH2 has done a lot of cool stuff. Substrate use cases for implementing DAOs. This is a whole thing. We're kind of running out of time here, to be honest. But there has actually been a couple of talks about this at previous Sub0, so I recommend watching those. Basically, there's nothing like super new. It's the same kind of principles that you have to follow everywhere else around DAOs. Alex has a comment on like why people aren't writing new stuff or innovating, and like it's expensive to have bugs, and I agree with that. It is more dangerous to experiment. It's not just a web app that throws a 500 and someone leaves your page. It could cost real money, and I think that's a good point. There's a lot of, I don't know what the term is. Like it's a harder problem to solve, steeper hill to climb, something.
But again, the thing about, like, even, yes, it is definitely harder to rewrite all the base parts of Frame, or the palettes at least that we've designed. But I guess the point is that would be even harder, and people have already done it, so it's doable, is build a whole new blockchains, right? Entire new infrastructures. Like the whole idea here is that we give you so much. Like yes, you definitely can make a mistake in your runtime code, or however your new framework is, or however your new palettes work. But ideally, we hand you like the networking layer, the storage layer, this layer. Like that is all just there for you, so you can really focus your intentions on what you want to accomplish. And I think that if you really want to be successful in this world of many substrate chains, you can't just be another one new palette purpose blockchain. Like you have all the same palettes as Polkadot, but one new thing. Like it's not really pushing. You're not really going to buy a new audience who's going to want to crowdfund for you, who's going to want to adopt you, all that stuff. You kind of really need to bring, I think, a bunch of new factors into the game so people can really see like this is something different, right?
Yeah, I also think like if you look at kind of like in the world before Substrate, right, you had the option of like you build a smart contract project or you build your own blockchain, and in between, now with Substrate we have this thing in between, but then Substrate is a stack in itself, and like we definitely have more teams that are more on that end of the spectrum of kind of like coming from the smart contract side than coming from the I had this, I really wanted to build it. I could have built a chain from scratch. That's really what I wanted to do, and now I have Substrate as a framework, and this makes things easier. But I'm still willing to go quite far in how much I change.
Yeah. All right, let's end it off on one final question, which is from Alex, and we can all go through each one of us and answer it relatively quickly, hopefully. Mm-hmm. If you had time to build one new project, what would you build? I would build a replacement for DNS. A lot of other people in the blockchain space working on this, but I think it's a super interesting problem. And I think it goes much deeper than other people in the blockchain space work on. Like Handshake is the one that comes the closest to actually implementing the full vision, but a full replacement of DNS. That's what I would want to work.
And in your mind, what is the number one problem that's not being solved by current solutions? For example, like ENS.
Integration with the existing world, right? Where you need support in routers in everything.
Just making it usable.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm going to stay in the Polkadot ecosystem just to maybe people pick up some
ideas. This is in the Polkadot ecosystem too.
Yeah, sure.
It can be a parachain.
It could be, that's true. Like one thing I think is really interesting, and I have to give a shout out to Moonbeam, they were presenting earlier as well. It's like if I think about what kind of parachains are being built, you have like conceptually you can think of three types. Like one is just application specific chains, right? You have chains that are just kind of like one chain, one app kind of idea, and you just bake your application logic into your Substrate runtime. And then the other one is kind of like domain specific chain. So you look at the problem domain and to solve that, you come kind of like bottom up, right? You think about scalability or some privacy or whatever, and you try to solve that. One thing I think that's quite interesting is more vertical specific chains, something like what Moonbeam is doing. So they come more from the actual user and use case and think, okay, we want to build a platform that's really good for DeFi. What does that mean, right? Like, are there like utilities or primitives within a platform that would actually serve that user base? And for DeFi, we have Moonbeam, and I think there's one or two other teams that are looking into something similar. But if I had time, I think I would do that for gaming. I would really like to see that, and I think there's actually not really a comprehensive view on how to serve these kind of developers and users.
Yeah, I think I can't think of something better than what I had already suggested, which is that's I want Shawn's super simple Substrate system, which is I want to not use frame system. I want to have my own system palette and work from there and build all the palettes from there. And it would be, I don't think it would be practical, but I think it'd be a great educational tool. And I think really what I've seen from like creating the Substrate kitties is that if you create this kind of very bottom level starting point, you really can capture a lot of users and get them like a strong foundation to build off of. And so something like that really would be what I'm interested in. I think the other idea I had mentioned in our podcast, the relay chain, a while back was an idea about a chain that's fully autonomous. So the idea was that the chain's purpose is it hosts a web page, and users can suggest changes to the web page, and it would track which, like the canonical chain would be whichever web page collects the most ad revenue, and it would pay out users using the ad revenue, pay for its own hosting using the ad revenue, etc. And the idea is that we just have this, like, you know, it could be, I mean, I can imagine the most simple use case of it is it would be like a decentralized blog where anyone can submit a blog post. And basically we just encourage good writing by whatever gets most views, whatever gets the most ad revenue, whatever keeps the chain alive. But, I mean, this is one of those things that's really easy to talk about and say like, oh, this is such a cool idea, but, may not work at all when it actually comes down to building it. But, something along those lines of having this completely autonomous blockchain would be super cool, I think. Yeah. Sounds like Sub0. Yeah, I mean, it could be. Actually, there's one more thing I wanted to talk about before we end this. And the thing is that a really open spot I see in Substrate is that someone really needs to work on a dedicated ink interface. Like, I think we have some teams already building a lot of ink stuff, but like something like Polkadot.js apps, but more focused on just working on ink and working with ink and making it easy to upload a contract, making it easy to, restore a tombstone, all that kind of stuff. I think that right now, ink just right now doesn't have the love or at least the time at Parity to really get someone on the UI side to really take it as a baby. And so if there's someone out there who really loves smart contracts, really loves, WASM, really loves, building stuff in JS, like I think all the tools are out there to make it. We just need someone to kind of nurture the baby. Sveta says this is in process. Great. So that's awesome. But I was talking to Robin. I think we agreed, like, in the last conversation we had with a developer trying to build on ink, most of the problems they're running into was just like some misconception about what the UI was saying and what was happening on the blockchain. Like whether there was a contract in the local storage that was deleted on a purged blockchain, a Substrate chain. And so they were trying to interact with a contract which they saw in the UI but didn't exist in the blockchain. And these kinds of things, like we just need someone to walk through and massage out all these kinks.
Great. Thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Doesn't love swag.
Yeah.
I'll see you around.
Cool. See ya.
Bye-bye.